New video. Apparently, the election was stolen? That's gonna hook some people. I'm curious to see what the claim will be regarding Trump stealing the election from Kamala Harris. Um, I'm not stupid, so I'm not willing to just believe things. So I'm curious. We'll see. Let's hear him out.
Truth Alliance. Nathan, it's great to have you back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully, your inbox didn't absolutely explode since last time.
Well, listen, I don't want to redo the first interview. People should watch that interview. We're going to try to sort of build on that. But in the first interview, to sort of summarize, you brought
I
us
am sorry about
information that
anybody's
you
ears.
believed pointed to irregularities and red flags within the 2024 election results. And we explained the methodology. We looked at heat maps. We looked at hand counts versus machine counts. And we sort of left it as Nathan has presented a case, the audience can evaluate, I can evaluate, and then we will come back. Is that sort of a fair assessment of where we were?
Yes, yes.
Good. So listen, I'm going to put the lead. I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to put it up front. Okay. I am not convinced that there has been any kind of fraud or rigging based on an analysis I've done speaking to other statisticians about your work. Now, I want to give you the opportunity to respond, so I'll just kind of lay it out as I see it. You presented us some heat maps. They show some statistical patterns, that's for sure. I didn't find evidence of fraud in the heat maps, which you conceded, right? I mean, you said the heat maps are a signal that we should look into. I have not found evidence of fraud in the heat maps necessarily. And then I went further and I said, can I find any direct evidence of a vote change or manipulation? And I didn't. And what I did find is that Republicans performed pretty damn strongly in 2024 up and down the ballot. And what I mean by that is Trump won. The Republicans did well in the Senate. The Republicans did well in the House. And to me, that sort of raises an Occam's razor question, which is what is more likely here? That a conspiracy involving multiple states and election officials successfully rigged machines while leaving intact paper trails, but fooling audits and all? Or did Republicans just kind of do well? And where I land right now, Nathan, is I think Republicans just did well.
I love it. Excellent points. Those are the very same points I've actually come to address today.
Okay.
Prepared. And you bring up the same things we're hearing when we put out the Minnesota report, when we've started making public some of our additional findings, and happy to talk about some of the on-the-ground findings that have been made public recently. Main pushback, as you said, right, is people cannot, I'd say people argue, very valid, that if this happened, right, if the idea of if there was a grand compromise of our systems, it would have to be a massive operation, right? And it would have been leaked by now. It would have required so much coordination across multiple states, etc.
Well, let me pause only because I don't
yes.
want you to respond to a claim I'm not making. I do think it is true. I didn't make an assertion about the number of people that would need to be involved. I did make an assertion about how widespread and all-encompassing it would have had to be. But I think the biggest thing I'm kind of looking at right now is we would have some of what I would consider direct evidence rather than the heat maps and the statistical representations of data that you've presented. That's, I think, where I am right now.
Yes, and that's an excellent point, because if there's smoke, there's fire. And where's the fire?
Oh man, I wish I watched the prior video. I do think there are circumstances in the world. It's not even a thing. I know there are circumstances in the world where people do not understand why X thing has happened. What has caused the circumstance that took in place that is an anomaly from my current understanding? When stuff like that happens, they use their level of knowledge based off their experience and the information gained to create a conclusion that makes the most sense to them. And oftentimes, and when I say oftentimes, I mean oftentimes, it's not a true reality. Think of it like how people tell you, you've heard of this before, that when it comes down to your memory is faulty. It oftentimes is a situation where it's you trying to piece together information of your past based off the things you can remember. A lot of times it won't be a one-to-one reenactment of what truly has happened. That happens all the time when it comes to memory. Now think of it in a scenario where there is a null and void information gap. At least for memories, there you might be able to trigger a neuron in your brain to spark a specific memory of information that is there but may be lost and buried. But in a circumstance where that information does not exist at all, it cannot be uncovered. It cannot be a eureka moment. It has to be found. And the intentionality of finding the information itself is not something that most people want to do because they think they have the answer based off their limited experience. So just because there are things that look weird, strange, fishy, I do think it's very appropriate to at least do a little bit more digging before trying to come up with a pretty wild conclusion.
Right? If there's all of these concerns. Now, I will highlight, as you said, the analysis that the ETA has been making public is not proof of election fraud. Statistics on their own is not proof of election fraud.
Right.
It is at best a good indicator of where you should go and investigate and where you should go look. And as I mentioned in our when you talked to me last time, the ETA has actually been investigating on the ground in the places that we've been flagging concerns. And some of that is Florida, and we'll talk about that here shortly.
Yeah.
But there's other places as well that we will be making public very soon with some legal action. And I can talk just a little bit about some of those other findings. But a few things I wanted to bring up that aren't well known right now. And as you said, right, if there was a compromise of our systems, where's the additional support? Where's the concerns? Well, a few things that most people may have heard of, but may not have actually looked into, is that per the reports of the FBI and the NSA, Russia was found to have been involved in a targeted campaign to breach county election systems and their voter registration databases across all 50 states in 2016. Now, there are some caveats about what they say are the implications, but what's important is we've also found during our investigations, and we'll actually show you some examples, but they successfully infiltrated 2 counties in Florida. And one of those is St. Lucie County. And we've actually been investigating St. Lucie County for the 24 election on the ground. And we've been releasing reports with some other investigative journalists. We'll talk about some of those findings. And as you said, you want hard evidence of actual issues.
Well, let me mention, about
yes.
the infiltration. Tell me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that the reporting is Russia did target all 50 states in 2016.
Yes.
And that the word infiltrated seems a little squishy to me because, number one, I know that there are county officials that deny that county was infiltrated, but I believe the consensus is that not a single vote was impacted, and that was 8 years ago, and a lot has changed since 8 years ago, right? I mean, we're using 8-year-old data.
Well, here's some important pieces.
Yeah.
One, it is confirmed by these public reports and a recent book that came out as well. I think it's called Rage.
Yep.
Where they confirmed that not only did they get into the systems in St. Lucie County, Florida in 2016, but there were concerns that the malware involved could have allowed manipulation, but they didn't find any actual evidence.
Well, it's a little more than that, though, Nathan. I want to be fully clear with my audience. It's not only that, it's that what they were able to infiltrate with the malware was the voter registration database, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that is not the voting system.
It is not. But
okay, good.
There are, generally speaking, 2 systems we use, right? You've got your registration,
yes,
which is, a account of who can show up to vote. And you've got your tabulation system, or however you count your votes. And in the US, it's system, it's machine based.
Totally.
What's important is, as we've dug a little.
I don't have much to say because I'm waiting for the actual claim being made. We're just right now laying the foundation, the uh, the underlying parts of the very specific claim. Everything he said is factual. I do think David's clarifying questions are allowing the opportunity to flush out any misperceived connotations that can be made from the way he's talking about what he's talking about, which I do think is important. So I don't have much to say yet because I'm we haven't gotten to the core piece yet.
A little deeper, especially now, we are starting to bring up some major concerns. There's one other piece is there was, per 2016, the Illinois State Board of Elections did report that not only was their voter registration database breached, but they found that they didn't find any manipulation or changes, but they did report that over 200,000 registered voters' information was stolen. So we
Yes.
bring this up. And what's important is, yes, we're not saying that any changes happened in 2016.
All right, that was a claim. Do I need? I don't think I need a fact check. I doubt he's lying about that. Because that's a pretty very specific number. So I don't think I need to fact check that. I don't think you guys need that one. I'm still waiting. Still waiting.
But what's important is a few things. One, if you have successfully infiltrated a system, cybersecurity wise, there are concerns of one, how did you do it? Can you do it again? And what do you get out of it? And so it's kind of the equivalent of saying, well, the robbers broke into the house. They didn't steal anything, but we're all good to go. Well, our concern is maybe they didn't change anything when they came into the system, but just having access to the voter registration information allows you to know who is active and who is inactive in voting. And if you were to successfully compromise both systems, now you have the list of people who are eligible to vote, and you could potentially vote for them. And so those are concerns. As I said, there's no current evidence that's been made public showing that this has happened yet.
Right.
But what's important is those are two pieces of the pie you would need to successfully manipulate elections, especially digitally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that those might be necessary, but they certainly wouldn't be.
It's been made public showing that this has happened, are eligible to vote, and who is inactive in voting. And if you were to successfully compromise both systems, they didn't change anything when they came into the system, but just having access to the voter registration information allows you to know who is active and who is inactive in voting. And if you were to successfully compromise both systems, now you have the list of people who are eligible to vote. Can you do it again? And what do you, if 2016, the Illinois State Board of Elections did report that not only was their voter registration database breached, but they found that they didn't find any manipulation or changes, but they did report that over 200,000 registered voters' information was stolen. So we bring this up. And what's important is, yes, we're not saying that any changes happened in 2016. But what's important is a few things. One, if you have successfully infiltrated a system, cybersecurity wise, there are concerns of one, how did you do it? Can you do it again? And what do you get out of it? And so it's kind of the equivalent of saying, well, the robbers broke into the house. They didn't steal anything, but we're all good to go. Well, our concern is maybe they didn't change anything when they came into the system, but just having access to the voter registration information allows you to know who is active and who is inactive in voting. And if you were to successfully compromise both systems, now you have the list of people.
Okay, so he's making the claim that because Russia knows or is able to get in there, one, they know how to get in there, and the information that they have available can be very important for their next part of their plan. Okay.
Who are eligible to vote, and you could potentially vote for them. And so those are concerns. As I said, there's no current evidence that's been made public showing that this has happened yet. But what's important is those are two pieces of the pie you would need to successfully manipulate elections, especially digitally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that those might be necessary, but
yeah, I mean, those could be problematic. But again, you need evidence of them actually getting into the tabulation system and actually voting for them. Having the information is problematic, don't get me wrong, but it's only one piece of the puzzle that you're trying to create.
They certainly wouldn't be sufficient. We agree on that.
It would require a bit more effort as well.
Yeah.
And
I guess the issue I came up, and by the way, I think you're doing really good work, and I think everything you're doing is valuable. I'm just giving my opinion of where I come down, and I just think
Yes.
Republicans won, and I wish it wasn't the case. I think every one of these things is worthy of investigation. I think the problem sometimes, people who point to smoke and say, this means there's fire, and fire means one particular thing, sometimes exclude other explanations, which in our first interview, as I presented them, you kind of acknowledged, yes, it also could be that, but we're worried that it's this other thing. Totally legitimate. As one example, we talk about the Clark County stuff in Nevada, and this artificial cap on turnout. And one of the things I found when researching Clark County, a lot of older folks in that county, right? Demographically, it's kind of an interesting county. If you're counting turnout as votes divided by registered voters, if you had outdated voter rolls, maybe because it's a population that's older, maybe because a lot of those folks have passed away, that would give you a signal that might look like smoke, artificially low turnout. And in fact, it's a result of the demographics of Clark County. This is like one micro example of how you've identified some smoke. Awesome. I found a source of the fire that may be different than what you are alluding to. Fair to say?
Yeah, I wonder if he's trying to make the case that Russia was voting for people to help inflame the vote for Trump, which is a pretty strong claim, or at the very least, it's a possibility, I guess.
Yeah,
Explain it clearly, at least.
Yeah, that's good. And the main point is, as we said, we kind of make the findings public so that we can have these conversations.
Right.
Good pushback for Nevada, though, and as we actually put in our reports, is we don't use turnout to do that analysis for Nevada. It is based purely on the cast vote record, which is the individual vote cast per voting machine, per voting location. So there's no turnout analysis in that. And the effects we're seeing, the strong shift in the amount of votes Trump is getting after 250 or so ballots cast per machine or per location, it does bring up some other concerns because we have started looking at those down ballot races, the partisan and nonpartisan races. And as you said, if we're looking for some smoke, one of the symptoms that has been brought up time and time again by election fraud experts across the world, for example, Roman Udot, Sergei Shvilkin, they put out papers and reports looking at Russian elections, looking at more normal like Swedish elections, and they flagged that the symptoms they see in what is attributed to be manipulation in Russian elections is that there is some type of effect where, for example, in the 2011 Russian election, it'll be like 80-90% turnout for polling locations, and then that is where a very large spike of the votes begins to be seen for the pro-Putin party. And it matches the concerns we've been finding across the U.S., but as you said, it itself is not proof of election fraud. So what I'd like to do is I would like to the 2011 Russian election, it'll be like 80-90% turnout for polling locations, and then that is where a very needed to be manipulation in Russian elections is that there is some type of effect where, for example, in the 2011 Russian election, it'll be like 80-90% turnout for polling locations, and then that is where a very large spike of the votes begins to be seen for the pro-Putin party. And it matches the concerns we've been.
High turnout. So it's an irregular amount of turnout, and they all happen to only vote for Putin. I mean, the claim there is that though that high amount of turnout does not live in reality, there are bots, there are fake people that is turning out that are being used to vote for a very particular person. It seems like the claim that he's making, or the potential claim
finding across the U.S. But as you said, it itself is not proof of election fraud. So what I'd like to do is
yeah, I mean, you can make the claim that Republicans just turn out more than Democrats in the election of 2024. I mean, that's literally a claim you could just make.
Would like to go back and very quickly touch on what we recently put out for the Minnesota and the hand count data. I want to make an update on that. And then I'd like to talk about Florida and the on-the-ground investigations that have been conducted there and the things we're finding.
And what would be great as you do that is give us the top lines, and then we'll dig into it just so people don't get lost. Yeah.
Got it. All right. So for Minnesota, very simple. The ETA, after we last spoke about some of that initial preliminary data we put up, we have now put on our website, electrotruthealliance.org, a special report for Minnesota. We are looking at, I believe, District 8. Let me verify here. Yes, District 8, Minnesota. And so some important pieces is District 8 has those hand count rural areas that were small enough where they hand counted and never counted their votes digitally during the 24 election. And then they have the rest of the county and the rest of the district, which is machine-based. And pretty much what we put in that report, and as we spoke about last time, is we are seeing a significant discrepancy between the locations that hand counted versus the locations that machine counted.
Yes.
Well, I want to address a few things first and foremost. Well, in our initial preliminary report that we put out, the heat map had some errors in it that we went back and we made a follow-up, address, and we said, hey, here were the errors, here's the update and the corrections. Did it change our concerns? Absolutely not. And what our report actually does, and we visualize it for you, is we're showing that of the same size rural areas, the same amount of registered voters and amount of voters in these precincts for hand count and hand count precincts versus machine count precincts. We did that direct comparison, not only the presidential race, but we did this as well for the down ballot races. So we did the presidential, the Senate, and the House for the District 8 of Minnesota. And we show that statistically speaking. And the reason why we think it is important is, as we said before, right? If there was a compromise of our systems, what would normal look like versus what would abnormal look like? And Per our analysis and per the work of Roman Udot and Sergei Stokin and their statistical findings, they argue this. They say that a normal election should have little to no relationship between the amount of turnouts or the amount of voters that are showing up across multiple locations and the amount of vote a candidate is getting. In layman's terms, it means that you shouldn't see a substantial change in the percentage of votes a candidate is getting from low turnout to medium to high turnout. And we actually see that effect. And I do have a visual for you. It's the first visual in what I sent you. And it shows the hand count on the right, scatterplot wise, versus the machine count. And we see that. We see that in these precincts that hand counted in District 8, the relationship is flat. And Trump is winning a majority of the votes in those locations. And that was one of the issues we found in that initial heat map, is that, in fact, those rural areas that were hand counted when we fixed the.
All right, let me move myself here. I do think I'm in the way of what this map is trying to show. You know, I'm just gonna go full screen. So, all right, I'm gonna explain.
That hand counted in District 8, the relationship is flat. And Trump is winning a majority of the votes in those locations. And that was one of the issues we found in that initial heat map, is that, in fact, those rural areas that were hand counted when we fixed the data based on over 50%, can't really see that effect. And I do have a visual for you. It's the first visual in what I sent you.
All right,
it shows the hand count on the right, scatterplot wise, versus the machine count. And we see that. We see that in these precincts that hand counted in District 8, the relationship is flat. And Trump is winning.
Hand counted, the relationship is flat. Okay.
Majority of the votes in those locations. And that was one of the issues we found in that initial heat map, is that, in fact, those rural areas that were hand counted when we fixed the data based on over 50% or higher registration voters to get rid of the noise.
I mean, this clearly defines the idea that there was just more turnout for red, but okay.
Winning in those
for hand counts. And that just proves the initial claim. This seems a lot different, obviously. It's intersecting.
Count smaller, more rural areas.
So can you've said a lot, Nathan, and I want to keep it conversational so the audience doesn't get lost and we take these things one by one. You're completely right in how you are representing the data in terms of the relationship between turnout, hand versus machine count, and who people were likely to vote for. This was something we talked about last time. I think it's extraordinarily between turnout doesn't get lost.
In those hand counts, smaller.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out. So this is candidate. All right, let me answer myself again. All right, so you can see my mouse though. This is candidate vote share percentage, so how much they voted for a particular candidate. This is the voter turnout percentage, and then these are the lines for Trump and Kamala Harris. And on this one, there was a very clear correlation. The turnout of the individuals is 60, pretty consistent, and the candidate that they're voting for, and then here's like the amount of turnout. So it didn't really change regardless of the amount of turnout. I mean, it was pretty consistent across the board. Same with the blue. And this one, when there was very low turnout, it was pretty clearly in favor of Kamala Harris. But once it got larger turnout, there was a drastic shift and change where it just really just dominated with Trump. So the claim that I'm sure he's making it, and the kind of through line is right here, was like 50%. This is the same type of through line between this, it is here at this 50% mark. So around here is when turnout got pretty big, like around the same point, around like 80-ish%. I can't really see, the numbers are pretty small. But yeah, it looks like around 80%. So at this 80% mark here where it started kind of uplifting, and here when it started uplifting is when everything kind of changed. Now, I would imagine there would be like a spike of data, an intersecting point around, whether this is 80, 70, 50, I don't know what it is, that is pretty consistent here and here. I don't necessarily think that means that it's a cause of manipulation. I understand where the data points are kind of coming to the conclusion. You have foreign interference, and then you have situations where magically more turnout gives so much more drastically certain votes to a particular side. It is weird, don't get me wrong, but it's hard for me to say it's causal.
More rural areas.
So can
But
we?
his-
You've said a lot, Nathan, and I want to
Yes.
keep it conversational so the audience doesn't get lost and we take these things one by one. You're completely right in how you are representing the data in terms of the relationship between turnout, hand versus machine count, and who people were likely to vote for. This was something we talked about last time. I think it's extraordinarily important to look into that. However, I see
I'll
a
be interested
differential
to read the
diagnosis
report.
that doesn't point to subterfuge, and that includes demographic differences. In other words, these areas, precincts that you have indicated are more likely to go Trump. They are by their nature, I believe, more likely for demographic reasons to be Trump precincts, if that makes sense. And I think when I said that last time, you said, I don't have anything to rebut that. I'm just investigating other explanations, which I think is great. I think to be honest and not honest, I think you're being honest, to be robust in our analysis, we have to be able to explain away the demographic differences that exist, whether some of these areas had more mobilization or community characteristics that impacted turnout, whether some of these had barriers to voting or access issues in terms of early voting or number of places to vote, this sort of thing. And I don't believe you've done that yet.
Buying Windows shouldn't be complicated. Windows Plus offers free, no-pressure estimates, making it...
So I would actually push back and say that this recent analysis, we did dive into a little bit more of the demographics.
Okay.
And actually, I agree with you in what you said, and that was the main pushback we had, was the demographics of the hand-counted areas, we believe, is Trump-aligned, and we do show that. But what we're highlighting is less of the demographics and more of the behavior that the voters are exhibiting. And that's what's important, is we're saying that even though in these hand-count areas that Trump is winning the amount of votes, he's getting a majority of the votes in these smaller precincts that were hand-counted in the district, the relationship those precincts are showing is normal human voting behavior. We don't see that in higher turnouts, Trump is getting more votes. We don't see that here. We actually see he's keeping around the same amount of votes across all of the range of turnouts. But this is why we compare it then to the machine count precincts. And these are the same size precincts, by the way. So we said, let's look at just the precincts across the rest of the county and the rest of the district and look at them and say, if these are similar demographics, they're more rural areas, they have the same amount of voters in them, how does it compare? And that's where we've been flagging that there is a strong relationship for our analysis where in places of higher turnout, Trump is getting more votes. And I'll give you a rough estimate. I believe the relationship is almost 1-to-1, meaning for every 10%. So for example, if we start and we look at precincts of 60% turnout, let's say Trump is getting close to 45% or so. These are just rough estimates.
Yeah.
And then let's say you go up to 70%. Trump is on average getting 10% more votes per 10% turnout. That's a 1-to-1. That is a huge red flag because we're not seeing this in other places that look statistically normal. And I wanted to show this last piece for you and just explain why this is abnormal voter behavior-wise. This is the third graph. This is a new way of looking at the scatter plots in the math without it just being a big blob of dots. And I understand, it's hard to look at the big blob of dots and scatter plots and be like, okay. So what we did, this analysis is the same thing. This is all of the precincts in the district, for example. And instead of just showing them as a scatter plot, we put them in bins. We grouped them by 10%. So lowest turnout precincts in the district is 30% turnout. Highest is roughly somewhere to 90-95%. And so all we did is we said, let's look at that relationship between as turnout increased or precincts of higher turnout.
Okay, so yeah, around 80% is the differentiating mark.
Versus precincts of lower turnout, how are both candidates performing? And this is where we flagged the same concern we're seeing in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, and we've now just made public in Florida. And it's the same type of relationship we're seeing in Nevada, but they don't use turnout. And what's important is, and we'll talk about this for Florida, we started looking at what we would argue is more normal behavior, and it seems to be exhibited in mail-in voting. And I think we touched base on this last time, I don't recall, but we said mail-in looks statistically normal. But when we look at election day or early voting, the effect we're seeing is what this third graph shows. And I'll explain what this shows. It shows that, for example, from 30% turnout to around 70% turnout. So precincts from 30 to 70%, Trump has a majority of the votes, but it begins to decrease as turnout is increasing across all of these precincts.
Hold on, am I looking at the wrong chart? Because to me, it looks like,
Third.
are we looking at District 8 turnout binning right now?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, it looks to me like Trump's share goes up, not down.
So I was saying Harris. So
Oh, okay. I think you said,
Yeah, I was confused for a second as well. I was like, what do you mean Trump had the majority? Kamala Harris had the
Trump, but you meant Harris.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
So good catch. So at 70% and lower turnout, Harris has a majority of the votes. And then we actually see almost a stair step, right? Where higher turnout, more votes for Trump until Trump actually begins to win a majority of the votes around 80%. And then around 90%, they kind of switch again.
I am curious to see why this correlation matters. Because I would be similar to David Pacman in the sense that the populations where there is lower turnout, or the precincts that had lower turnout, probably have the lower, you could argue, have a lesser ability to vote. But I'm trying to think, it's like to lower turnout, lower amount of people, but the lower amount of people, this is share percentage, this is not totality. This is not cumulative data, it's share percentage. But I guess you could, I'm trying to think. There are so many factors I'm still not moved just because it's a statistical anomaly in terms of the relationship between turnout and share percentage or vote percentage. I don't I'm not moved. Even though if it looks similar to Russia, I'm not moved because of so many of the differentiating factors of the political polarization in America right now. I think Russia has a lot more. Um, is it what I call it? Magnanimity does not sound like the proper term. Homogeneity, homogeneity. It's you guys know what I'm talking about. Homogeneity. Um, Very similar types of people, even though there's a lot of different types of identities. There's a lot more overlap in terms of the values being attributed. So you can kind of manipulating that data is a lot different. I don't know. I just I need to be sold.
Now,
It's
why would
not
Harris
selling
go
me.
back up and win at 90% turnout? In other words, Trump only ended up with the slightest margin of victory at the 80% level, and even there, it's barely. Why does Harris go back up?
Well, a good
That's a
point to
good
looking at
question.
these bins, and this one doesn't show it, is you want to look at how many votes are in each of these bins and how many precincts. So there is a little bit of statistical noise when you do it by fixed percentages. So I assume there's not a lot of 90% precincts here. So you're going to see some of the noise pick up again. And that's what's really important in what we started doing now, and I'll show you for Florida, is we've shown it both ways. 10% in increments, and then that like weighted total of, you got like 200,000 votes or 20,000 votes in each bin. But this effect, to be honest, this effect mirrors the concerns seen in Russian elections, where you're seeing a strong relationship to the amount of voters that show up or the amount of votes cast to one candidate growing. And as we've argued time and time again, there should be almost a flat effect where both candidates are sitting at whatever vote share. Let me explain why this is weird, because maybe I haven't covered it well. This is a snapshot, by the way.
Okay, and there we go. He's about to explain why this relationship is problematic. This is what I'm here for.
Right. So this is when all the votes are cast. There's no time component here. And the bottom axis, right, the vertical, the horizontal x-axis is the amount of votes per the amount of voters. So turnout is just, I got 100 voters that could vote, 50 of them vote, I got 50 votes cast. And what's important here is, let's argue that this is a effect of a really popular candidate, right? Which is the common pushback we get. Let's say Trump is really popular and he gets a lot of the votes in some of these bigger places. Well, the problem here is, as we said, in order to mobilize voters to do this, it's not really possible to mobilize voters to create this effect consistently across all of these precincts. Why? Because you don't know what your turnout is going to be until after the votes are cast. You can't just target specific precincts. And this effect is across all the precincts in the district. And the thing is, humans, because of how we vote, there's not really a way for us to target and be like, all right, my precinct is going to get 60%. Let's mobilize all the Republicans in this band of precincts and get them to show up. And so we're not just seeing this effect in certain bands of precincts. We're seeing this effect across all precincts in the district. To put that bluntly, our concern is that humans can't create this effect because there's no way for you to coordinate the effect occurring. And to see this effect, not just here, but across multiple places, such as Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, which is the most liberal county in Pennsylvania, to see this in Clark County, Nevada, Las Vegas, where they use voting machines, to see this effect in North Carolina, and even in Florida, where we've now made public Miami-Dade. Why would you see that in the most liberal places in these states, the same effect? It really raises alarms. Now, I want to hear your concerns, your thoughts, your pushbacks.
No, listen, I mean, now, so we're basically at the end of our time, and I know you had 6 other slides.
I think you could still make the argument there was a more of a coordinated effort, especially in liberal areas. I probably would feel a little bit more concerned in Republican if this was like more of a Republican areas this was taking place, and maybe it is. I don't know the full data chart that he's referring to. In that sense, there is no incentive to consolidate voter turnout in different precincts because it's Republican dominated, but there might be an incentive, especially as a dissenting attribute of increasing turnout to specific precincts, to dissuade liberal voters in that precinct and make it more difficult for them to vote. Like there could be that argument. I just don't know if that's what his data tells them, but
to get to, and I just don't think we're going to get to them today. You've now made a number of new claims, which I would have to research, certainly, which is what I encourage everybody to do. I'm not prepared to rebut everything I just heard right now, but the impression I came away with from our first conversation was I am not at this point in any way comfortable suggesting that this was a rigged election. Before I let you go, if someone just said, hey, Nathan, what is the most direct single piece of evidence you have that points not to a statistical anomaly alleged or real, but rather to an actual manipulation or rigging? Is what you just mentioned it, or is there something more direct you could point us to?
Oh, we definitely have things that are more direct that I can point you to. And we've started making them public. So recently in Florida, St. Lucie County, the ETA has been working with Allison Green, independent investigative journalist. She started putting the findings on her Substack. It's up to us. And the concerns we're finding is we've actually been to these counties that are raising red flags that our statistics is showing is weird. I've actually been on the ground and done some door knocking. And we've looked at the voter registration database from the county's own records and compared it to who cast their votes and precincts that are highly anomalous. And we've started making this public. We'll be making even more of this public and doing some type of joint video. But I went to Florida. I went to St. Lucie County. I met with Allison, and we went to some of the places that were strange on the ground, and we knocked on their doors. And the first place I knocked on was in a neighborhood that was under construction during the election, and no one lived there. And we asked the residents who lived there after the election and the house was complete, hey, did you vote in the last election? They said, yeah, we voted in Palm Beach County. They're in St. Lucie County now. And we said, oh, okay, so you moved after the election. They said, yes. And then we said this. We said, well, what's interesting is we have your record right here, and it says your husband voted in this county for the 24 election. Are you aware of this? And they said, oh, no, that's weird. And that was the first door we knocked on. We then proceeded to continue to investigate, and we're now starting to make those further investigations public.
All right. Well, I want to look at that in more detail, and we will do it. We have set some.
Hey. Now that moves me. I'm not one for conspiracy, but if you give me evidence, if you give me strong claims, we can talk. That is weird. That is weird that someone did not know about their vote in an area that they used to live in. That is weird. Okay. All right. I'm here for it. I am here to listen. What? You know how crazy it would be that the only reason why MAGA made this whole hoopla about the election being stolen is so they could steal the election next time? Because the Democrats, imagine a Democrat trying to say, oh, the election was stolen after all of this hoopla. MAGA would turn their ears off completely. And it's been so much a part of the mainstream conversation. Independents wouldn't care either. But you have the actual evidence. That'd be genius, evil strategy. Interesting. I am going to pay attention to this. I want to know more about this. Let's look at some comments. Elon said if not for him, Trump would not have won. I believe him. Nathan Taylor quit his job to do his unpaid for the past year. He's a hero. Remember Trump saying, I don't need your votes? She should have not conceded so quickly. The fact that the orange projectionists accused Democrats of electronic cheating is a dead giveaway. People close to him are doing it. I don't know why the Democrats didn't demand a recount. That was a big mistake. There's no way that Trump did not cheat. It's how he lives. It seems like he sold people in this comment section. Nathan Taylor, I'm gonna write his name down. I want to bring him on the podcast. I need to talk to this guy. I'm very, very interested in this conversation. I'm gonna put him down as a potential guest. Interesting. Very interesting. Well, that's all we got there. I plan to react to a lot of this on stream. Hope you guys have a good one. Take care. Peace.